Truth TV, 19 March 2013. This is Douglas Bickford reporting live from Spokane, Washington. There it is right there. Today's low, which is 26 degrees right now at 7:27 a.m. in Spokane, Washington. That is not normal, okay? This is not normal, but they want us to believe that all these record-breaking temperatures, historical storms are normal. And I'm talking about the U.S. government here. If you want to call them the New World Order, the One World Government, whatever you want to call them, they're causing these weird weather things going on all over the country. Now here's another one. This is from the Weather Channel. This is a huge storm. They named it. It's so big they named it UKKO, whatever the hell that means. And there's a reason that they're naming these storms too. And I gotta search that and figure out why they're naming these storms all of a sudden. It's got something to do. All these storms have something to do with chemtrails and HAARP. They're causing this stuff to happen. This is not normal. This is not created by Mother Nature. Mother Nature would never do this to her own planet. If they would quit using HAARP on us and spraying us with chemtrails, the Mother Earth would retake herself and she'd go back to normal. We'd have normal blue skies. But anyway, there it is for you. This is part 2 of why in the world they spraying. Watch the video, please, and send it. Thank you.
Very big red flag of fallout from these materials are pH changes to the forest floor. We have very extensive studies from the U.S. Department of Agriculture on the soils in our region, and those soils have changed in 5 to 6 years. The pHs have changed in this area as much as 10 to 12 times toward alkaline in 5 to 6 years. I've personally been in the forest testing with USDA soil scientists who just scratched their heads and seem to have no explanation for incredibly profound changes in pH, which is affecting the ecosystem here tremendously.
Aluminum buffer action, aluminum hydroxide is what we think it is, plus the barium carbonate, strontium titanate, strontium oxides, barium oxides, probably some aluminum oxides in there, that this has apparently driven our acid soils about 20 times more alkaline to about 6.8.
There are simply too many dots here that connect. Our skies are almost never blue anymore. That is a named consequence of geoengineering. The amount of lost sunshine hitting the planet right now is beyond belief. If people look up the term global dimming, they will see that fully 20% of the sun's rays that reached the planet several decades ago are no longer reaching the planet. I mean, that's a profound change that few people even know is occurring. And you have very visible occurrences in the sky from the aircraft, a very visible sun-blocking, expanding, dingy trails that are exactly what geoengineering patents describe.
Heavy aluminum, I'm talking like in the 40s and 50s up to 3, 4, 5,000. That's still common. Barium, strontium to somewhere 40 or 50 to, again, about 2,000 or 3,000. Same for both barium and strontium.
Where is this mountain of metal coming from? Why is asthma, ADD, Alzheimer's, autism, all elements related in many studies to aluminum or particulate inhalation? Why are these ailments going off the charts with no apparent explanation? Why has respiratory mortality in the continental United States gone from 8th on the list to 3rd in 6 years? And no one seems to ask any questions. Why every other person has asthma now? Why every other commercial on TV is an allergy medication? And again, when David Keith, the world's most recognized geoengineer, was asked on the record, had there been any studies done as to the consequences of dumping 20 million tons of aluminum into the atmosphere, his answer was patently no.
While geoengineers claim that their models are to cool the planet, a number of studies now are arising that indicate, yes, temporarily there will be regionally cooling as these particulates reflect the sun. However, they actually at night act as a blanket and will warm the planet. So the question now remains, why in the world are they spraying?
One of the things that geoengineering is about when you're environmentally doing something with the atmosphere, is that you can be engaged in weather modification. Historically, weather modification in the United States began to be looked upon in the 1940s as something that people would want to do. And so they started looking at making it enhancing snow, enhancing rain. They started looking at hurricane control. There was a whole bunch of projects in the 40s that started. One was Project Storm Fury, which turned into a disaster when they tried to modify a hurricane.
I'm Mark McCandlish. And for the better part of 30 years, I worked in the aerospace and defense industry. Had a secret clearance twice during my career. Some of the technology that I saw or participated in the creation of tends to play a role in some of the things that are used to control the weather. The very distribution process is being employed in the aerosol campaign, manipulating the weather, crops, taking over the food production or controlling the food production. The military applications, the process evolved when they realized in the 1800s that you can put things into the environment that will influence the uptake of moisture and where it drops out of the atmosphere again.
My name is Scott Stevens. I was a television weatherman for 20 years. These chemtrails are absolutely required to impact whatever weather event they were designing. And the trails were an absolute necessary ingredient for them to achieve their weather modification goals. So we're finding the aerosols, the metal particulates, all of those can be used and leveraged to create weather events that are several standard deviations or outside what would be typically normal. When the geoengineering really got underway with the Russians in the mid-70s, we ended up with snow in Miami. We ended up with frost deep into Mexico. The bizarreness of the weather really exploded on the scene when weather engineering got going in the mid-70s.
The Dakotas, in winter, they recorded a temperature of almost 100 degrees, 94 degrees. It broke the former record by 32 degrees. There's very profound things that people don't notice. Blue skies almost never. We almost never have dew on the ground. That's a known consequence of geoengineering if they did it, which they appear to be. It sucks the moisture out of the atmosphere. It doesn't descend, doesn't form dew. We have massive temperature disruptions. People are starting to wonder, why is it 80 degrees one day and then snowing the next day at 50 degrees or 45 degrees and then back up to 80 the day after that? When you push and pull the climate with these manipulation programs, of which there's a mountain of data to corroborate their existence, then you start to have massive fluctuations in the system. And we saw in March in the continental U.S., there were 15,232 temperature records broken. That's profound. Some of the daytime highs, the former records were broken by as much as 32 degrees. Don't people wonder what in the world is going on?
Whether they want to make it snow at 45, 46, 47 degrees. I remember when 38, 39 was a big deal. Those kind of snowfalls in the upper 30s. And now that's been pushed into the 40s.
There's a patent called ice nucleation for weather modification. This is a patent from NASA. It can be found online in its full form. This patent is for the creation of artificial snowstorms from what would have been rainstorms. However preposterous this sounds to people, if they look up Chinese create snowstorms, they will find a long list of articles where the Chinese Bureau of Weather Modification openly admitted that they were creating snowstorms until they did $1 billion worth of damage in Beijing. So my question would be, if the Chinese can do this, and NASA has a patent for the same purpose, why would we believe snow events here are natural when it's snowing now regularly at 45 degrees, sometimes 50 degrees, heavy, wet, concrete snow that's full of aluminum, full of barium, full of strontium? Consider the ice pack in their first aid kit that can sit dormant at room temperature for decades until the chemicals are mixed together, at which time it creates ice.
As an on-air meteorologist, I had a responsibility to my audience. There were storms that were not behaving as they were modeled or they historically would have responded.
If you can control where moisture is collected and where it's dropped, so to speak, in the form of rain or any other kind of precipitation, then you can really, you can do everything. You can steer the weather system. If you want to be able to manipulate the weather, one of the things we know about the materials that are being used in the aerosols, we've seen everything from aluminum oxide, barium salts, strontium, copper sulfate, potassium iodide, a number of different kinds of things, each of which have different levels of reactivity with the moisture in the air. Some, like aluminum oxide, tends to sequester the moisture. The aluminum oxide nanoparticles, which are microscopically fine and uniform in size, attract the humidity, the moisture in the air, and it basically forms like a nucleation process where the moisture condenses on these particles.
With cloud seeding, the cooling will be achieved by making clouds reflect a bit more sunlight back to space than they would otherwise, and less sunlight reaching the surface would tend to cool the planet. These aerosol particles act as something called cloud condensation nuclei, and these are sites where these particles act as sites where cloud drops can form.
Well, the one thing that we know has happened is because these are nanoparticles and they float like mad with a little bit of moisture added to them, they go over the Continental Divide and they dump all of California's rain into the Mississippi Valley, which is the reason they're having floods and tornadoes and fierce storms and odd weather back east. The effect here in California is drought.
Now then, if you hit that area of the sky with a beam of a particular kind of radiation, and you can heat those particles up, just like heating up, your cup of coffee in the microwave, these particles begin to vibrate and resonate if you use the right frequency of RF energy, that they then heat the surrounding air, and they will take all of that air and the moisture that's in it to a higher altitude where it's much colder, and it'll condense and then become a low pressure system.
Well, there's a couple of locations where they tend to be very interested in leaving their trails. The big one and the surprising one for me is under areas of high pressure, where you would expect to see the blue skies, the dry conditions. Those are prime targets for trailing. A couple of reasons. High pressure is stable. It's relatively still. We've got the clockwise flow around it. And if you accentuate the high, and so it's very easy to add those particulates of aluminum, barium, and whatever else they want to put in there. And as you add heat to that, those particulates then radiate the heat into the atmosphere and it warms. What does a warming atmosphere do? Boom, it expands. And so that's one way. It's a very simple way, but it's very apparent because under the high pressure, it's supposed to be quiet. It's supposed to be still. It's supposed to be blue. And we're not seeing that. Then as the storm approaches, the high begins to recede. And then they're running the flights back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and literally seeding the leading edges of the cirrus. So the cirrus canopy is accentuated. That cirrus canopy, which would maybe be 200-300 miles out ahead of a cold front, is now 450 miles.
Based on geoengineering data, it would appear the Pacific Northwest gets an excessive amount of the fallout from these programs because much of the weather, much of the precipitation and the storm tracks and the jet stream move across us. So as stated by globally recognized geoengineers like David Keith, that's the type of area they would want to seed these particulates as incoming fronts start to cover landfall. And that's exactly what we see here. When there's any kind of incoming front, we see jets everywhere.